Hello and welcome to Church and Main, a podcast for people interested in the intersection of faith, politics, and culture. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. So I want to take you back probably about 12 or 13 years ago. I was welcoming people to this special event that my church was hosting. I was the associate pastor of a congregation in Minneapolis, and there were people there from the Minnesota Council of Churches. They have a really strong refugee program, and we were welcoming people to take part in this event, and they had someone there, and my guest basically asked, which country takes in the most refugees? Well, the answer was the United States. America actually has a history of welcoming people fleeing persecution to set up new lives here. My cousin's wife actually is a refugee. She and her family escaped Cambodia in the mid-1970s, and they were welcomed and sponsored by a Lutheran church here in the Twin Cities. The church that I currently serve, which is First Christian Church of St. Paul, Minnesota, had a history of welcoming Southeast Asians also, as they were fleeing the upheavals that were taking place in that region as the Vietnam War ended in 1975. And while Minnesota is known for being a very white state in many ways, it also has a tradition of welcoming people from around the world. Minnesota, especially the Twin Cities, have substantial populations of Hmong, Somali, and Karen refugees. Churches have really taken the lead in welcoming all of these refugees. Lutherans, mainline Protestants, evangelicals, all of them have really worked to help these new Americans make their way here in the United States. Which brings me to this kind of very maybe disturbing thing that has come from the federal government. In January of 2026, the Department of Homeland Security started something in Minnesota called Operation PARRIS. The claim of the initiative was to combat fraud, and that meant going after the nearly 6,000 refugees here in the state who were here legally but had not yet received their green cards. What this led to was ICE going after a number of these refugees, and in some cases sending them to detention in Texas. Today, I am speaking with Emily Belz, a reporter with Christianity Today, to talk about Operation PARRIS, and especially how evangelical churches stepped up to try to protect refugees in Minnesota. Now, Belz had spent a fair amount of time here in Minnesota during Operation Metro Surge. She reported especially on how evangelical churches responded to ICE, in addition to this story on refugees. Now, I need to put a caveat here that while this is a story primarily about what is going on here in the North Star State, this issue regarding refugees and Homeland Security basically going after them is actually a nationwide problem. Before we go into our conversation, a little bit more about Emily. She is a senior staff writer on the news team for Christianity Today. She has nearly 20 years of experience in long-form feature reporting, writing in local, national, and international news. In addition to her time with Christianity Today, she has written for the New York Times, World Magazine, Plow, and the New York Daily News, The Hill, and the Indianapolis Star. So please join me in this very important discussion on the Trump administration and refugees with Emily Belz. Well, Emily, thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I wanted to start off by knowing a little bit about you, who you are, kind of your background, and also your spiritual background.
Oh, thanks for asking. I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, and I grew up in a Presbyterian home, and I've worked in evangelical media my whole career, so I feel very familiar with that world. I also went to a Presbyterian college, so there's a lot of Presbyterianism that I'm probably not even aware of that's there. But yeah, I think that despite the growing up in the Bible Belt and all of that, I was in a city that is in Asheville, North Carolina, which
Hmm.
is diverse spiritually, I would say. So I think that gave me a sort of insider outsider feel for spirituality. That there's a lot of different perspectives out there. So I think it's in the Bible Belt, but not exactly of the Bible Belt, if that makes sense.
It does.
But yeah,
So,
I think that being in I haven't done a lot of reporting in Minnesota before, but it was
hmm
interesting just to see. I'd be curious to hear your perspective on what the spiritual geography is of the Twin Cities, but it's interesting to see there too. I saw some similarities to Asheville in some ways of
hmm
there is this evangelical side of the city, but there's so much else going on. So I felt some familiarity, oddly enough, in being there.
yeah, Minnesota is interesting in that it is kind of like, especially the Twin Cities, kind of like Asheville on steroids. It's a bigger Asheville.
Right.
But it also has a very strong religious background. You know, it's very Lutheran, very Catholic. And so it kind of has that interesting mix that you may not see in other parts of the country. And so it's kind of fascinating to see what Minnesota is like, and it's in its religious landscape. And, it's also, pretty diverse. Obviously we have because of the Somali population, a growing Muslim population. And so the, it's just an odd duck, I think, for especially around the Midwest, in that it's both very diverse, but also I think very religious,
Hmm.
which I think kind of factored into some of how the state and people responded, especially with the ICE surge. I I think it really did factor in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to hold myself back from interviewing you because I think that I'm so interested in your perspective on everything as somebody who actually lives there. But yeah,
Yeah.
I noticed that in the short time I was there that
Mm.
there was just a lot going on in terms of there's some communities that were kind of working in their own lanes, but then there was this interesting overlap of different groups that I wouldn't expect to be working together who were working together. So
hmm
yeah, I'm interested in how you notice that stuff too.
Well, we can get to that as we chat, so no problem. But one of the reasons I did want to talk to you, because you wrote an article just recently in Christianity Today, kind of about refugees and how they were getting basically arrested by ICE. And the reason it's fascinating about that is Minnesota has, I think, a strong history of welcoming refugees. Obviously, there has been you talked about and picked up the Karen from Burma. Also, just a lot of people from Southeast Asia, especially dating back from the 70s. Obviously, we have welcomed in. There aren't as much refugees, but immigrants from Somalia, from different parts of the world. That it's kind of an odd thing that is a state that's still very primarily white European, but has always in some ways have opened up their arms to welcome people from every part of the world. And so here was this interesting story that actually kind of began, it seems like, in Minnesota, but has now kind of become nationwide. and that was talking about the what's called Operation PARRIS. Could you kind of explain a little bit about that, and what did you learn, especially in your time here?
Yeah, this is a pretty dramatic and shocking operation. I mean, I think people get confused between the terms refugees and asylum seekers. And
Hmm.
asylum seekers would be the people who show up in the border and ask for asylum. Refugees are people who wait at a camp overseas, often for more than a decade, for an invitation from the US to come and resettle here. And so they're legal immigrants. They've gone through all this vetting from different agencies in the US and the UN. So the fact that they were getting arrested, which was what was happening under Operation PARRIS, was shocking to everyone and not something anyone expected. And it wasn't even really announced. It was put on a press release on the USCIS website. So even the agencies who work with refugees didn't know that this was coming. They just started hearing from refugees' families who said that people hadn't shown up after work, who just disappeared. So it was a very scary and re-traumatizing situation for people who had already been through horrible persecution. I mean, that's the reason they were granted refugee status, is they they could
Hmm.
prove that they've had, experienced torture or persecution of other sorts, that their lives were in danger. So this operation is supposed to re-examine, quote unquote, their status, so their legal status. And what they could have done is just invite people in for interviews. Everyone is, registered with the government. The government has all their address. They have to keep an updated address. They have all their biometric data. They have all their background check information. It's very easy to find these people. So there was an easy way to do this, but instead they chose to like choose the most horrible way, which was grabbing people off the street, invading their homes. And then what ended up happening is a lot of these refugees were immediately transferred to detention centers in Texas. So it was the nature of none of this being announced, and then these sudden transfers to detention centers. It was a very scary situation. It remains a very scary situation, even though there's been some court orders that have halted some of this. But yeah, I think the operation was carried out in the most cruel way possible. It was done without, each of these refugees have resettlement agencies that partner with the federal government. And so even the resettlement agencies had heard nothing from their federal partners when I talked to them. So it was just this chaotic rollout that led to a lot of really heartbreaking situations.
And you share a few of those in the story. I think one you talked about was a nursing mother that was arrested and separated from her 5-month-old child. I mean, that's amazing and horrid to hear.
Yeah, and that was another instance of ICE entering a home without a warrant. The family had been helping someone else carry their groceries in,
Hmm.
and had the door propped open, and the agents came in and asked for their ID, and they shared their identification, showed they were legal refugees, and then they took the mom. So it's, just baffling and horrible. And she was immediately transferred to Texas and was there for weeks, until a judge ordered that she be released. So it took a judge's order. It wasn't, they could have just interviewed her and released her, but instead they were holding her as long as possible. And we have updated guidance from the federal government now that they're asking, or they're saying that they have the right to indefinitely detain these refugees. So that's still something that's being debated in courts, and we'll see how courts feel about that. So far, they've lost every single motion that they've made in these cases, but that doesn't mean that they won't ultimately prevail. So it's a really messy situation.
Do you have found out why they feel like they can do this, that they can just detain people that, you know, having gone through a long vetting process and are supposed to be getting a green card, all of a sudden just say, hi, we're just going to detain you? Was there any reasoning behind this?
Well, I think the Trump administration has made it clear that they're against the refugee program. I mean, they've all but shut it down. So now we have very few refugees who were admitted last year, and I think it's almost down to below 1,000 that are going to be released this year or allowed in this year. So they're effectively ending the one program that the president has control over. And I think that they're seeing this as another way to get rid of more people. And, you know, the Biden administration had raised the refugee levels. It was still a very low level. I mean, it took, because the first Trump administration had mostly dismantled the program, then it took a long time for the Biden administration to rebuild it. So it wasn't even until the last year or so that it was back to normal levels of refugee resettlement. But I think, I mean, I'm not trying to impute motives, but I think it's clear that there is an anti-refugee policy in the administration.
And one of the things that was also interesting in the article is how the church community stood up. I kind of grew up in a evangelical background, but in a more mainline Protestant background now. But I still follow things going on, and it was fascinating to see not just churches, but especially on Facebook, Arrive Ministries, and their whoever works their social media campaign accounts probably should get a raise, because they were doing a lot of work to spread the awareness of the issue. So I'm kind of interested in what you learned about how local community, the kind of people on the ground, what did they do to kind of get the message out to a wider audience?
Yeah, I think that it's important to know that Arrive is part of a conservative evangelical world. I think that people maybe assume now, because we have these political categories for everything, that they're not, but they really are.
Yeah.
And they share a building. I mean, you know all this stuff, but they share a building with Transform Minnesota, which is an evangelical organization for the whole state. They share it with a pregnancy resource center. They share it with a prison ministry. And so this is not mainline. They're very,
no, it's not.
They're very conservative evangelical. And so for them to be as angry as they are is significant. And it's part of why we went there to do reporting. This is a red line for a lot of more conservative Christians, the detention of refugees. I mean, refugees have relationships with a lot of evangelical churches because that's how the resettlement program works. They partner with individual families, and those families commit to them for a year or more to help them in their resettlement process. So there's a lot more knowledge of the immigrant situation with that particular category. Now, I think maybe that's expanding to other groups of immigrants. I mean, you would know more about that than me if you've noticed that happening with more conservative churches, but it seems to me that there's a little bit more understanding overall of different categories of immigrants and how hard things are to navigate any level of our immigration system because it's so messed up. And so I think there's even, I was listening to some conservative pastors deliver sermons in the, during all the Alex Pretty stuff, and just curious, if things were shifting at all. And I've heard people talk about the, Romans 13 is a big thing of follow the authorities. But then I was hearing more people talking about the midwives in Egypt who disobeyed because they wanted to save these babies and things like that. So I think even in evangelical churches, there's maybe some shifts going on where it's not just refugees that they're angry about, but it's all of this that's happening. I don't know if you've noticed any shifts like that, or if I was there for a short time, so my impressions are impressions.
I think there might be. I know, at least, especially on the refugee front, that was the big thing. But I've also know it's interesting. A lot of the kind of immigrant churches that tend to be more evangelical were kind of the focal points for a lot of mutual aid. And so I think that it's reaching into that as well. You may not hear it as much, and they probably don't get as much press, but I think that is happening. And I think especially with the refugees, that's kind of an entry point for the reasons that you said, is that there are so many churches that have, they're kind of set up in that way. What I found fascinating was that I was kind of aware of that, and a few other people were, but I would also hear from people who would think, well, are evangelicals doing anything? And I'm kind of like, yeah, they are. There are things happening, but it's either people aren't, in our kind of social media way, the algorithms only kind of show one side, so we don't get to see everything. But I think it is happening, probably on a slower basis. But I think especially here, if seeing a lot of what has been going on has really made people kind of more aware of what's happening. And like I said, especially with the refugees, that has been kind of the entry point.
Well, I saw just today that John Piper tweeted a verse about caring for the stranger. I don't know if you saw this.
No, I did not. That's interesting.
But he is getting raked over the coals on X. No surprise, but
no, yeah.
But it's from a lot of evangelicals, and so I guess I understand that people are quiet. Maybe, maybe they're doing the work on the more conservative side, but they're not advertising it because there is this culture on the internet of really bullying, I think. So,
yeah, I think probably a lot of it is happening sub rosa, that it's not probably for the reasons that just happened, because if someone like John Piper is getting raked over the coals for what he said, a lot of people are probably just going on, below the radar.
Yeah. What he said being one Bible verse. So
I know. And probably rather anodyne in some ways. It wasn't that, radical. I'm glad he said it, but it's not like it's shocking, but it's also X. So, these days it's yeah.
Yeah, but X becomes real life, as we've seen in many ways
sadly.
Yeah.
So one of the things also, because you, in that article, and you talk about it, is, DHS is actually expanding this, that they're actually wanting to detain more people as these people are waiting on their green cards. And so what do you think is going to be the plan forward? And I know Arrive is really the Minnesota branch of World Relief, which is the bigger organization, and they've also been kind of out front on this. What do you think is going to be the plan moving forward of how do they deal with this in the next few years?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's also unprecedented that Arrive didn't have lawyers for their clients because their clients didn't need lawyers because
Yeah.
they were legal. So now they've had to come up with legal strategies for these arrests. So, one thing that they've been doing is FOIA-ing the refugees' own files, and that takes a long time, but they don't know what they're walking into with these re-examinations. So they're trying to prepare their clients as much as they can for whatever it is the government might throw at them. I mean, the concern is that this is a new administration. The people who might be interviewing them might be completely unaware of the refugee program. They might be not experts in, let's say, Myanmar or wherever the country is that these people are coming from. And so they want to provide the refugees with as much and their lawyers with as much information as they can give to give them the best shot, because they think that maybe they're basically being sent through the whole refugee process again, which they've already done for years. So it's something that they're kind of putting the plane together as it's flying. But I think one big thing is going to be these court cases. And so far, we've had the refugees have won their cases in Minnesota, but the administration has appealed all of those decisions. And so it's not going down without a fight. So yeah, they are trying to continue to do this. I keep hearing rumors of refugees being arrested in other states. I haven't heard anything confirmed on that, but it's hard for anyone to know because these refugees are self-sufficient. They are not regularly in touch with organizations to support them. They have jobs, they have a life, they have generally been successful in resettling, and so they don't. Usually it's only the extreme cases where someone will call and say, "Hey, my relative is disappeared and I don't know what to do." So yeah, it's something that we're going to continue to follow because there is this aggressive. I mean, in some ways, the refugees are the easiest immigrants to arrest because they aren't expecting it. They're legally here. They, again, like I said, all their information is with the government, so the government knows where they are. And to me, it seems just like the lowest hanging fruit to go after people who have complied with every single appointment that's been asked of them. They have, followed all the rules, and now they don't. I've talked to refugees in Minnesota who are in hiding, and they feel like their world's upside down because they thought, well, we followed all the rules, and now we can't trust the federal government. Now we can't even open our doors to any agent of the federal government. So there's this, it's really tough. It's just, someone described it to me as Kafkaesque, and it does feel that way because now if they get called in for these re-interviews, like a normal way that the government could have done this, just go to the office and talk to an immigration officer, they're afraid of doing that. So it's created this worse situation where now places like Arrive are trying to convince refugees to go to those appointments, and then refugees are scared justifiably. So there's this broken trust that's we see this play out with the Trump administration. I've seen it play out in so many communities where just this social fabric gets torn apart needlessly, and it's so hard to put it back together.
How do you think that, you kind of touched on it earlier, but with seeing what's happening, how do you think that this is affecting evangelicals in different places. And obviously there are going to be people who this doesn't affect because in a lot of ways it doesn't touch them, but it's obviously touching people in, as your reporting shows here in Minnesota and probably in other parts of the country. How are they kind of wrestling with all of this?
Yeah. Again, I'm interested in your perspective, but I have noticed, I mean, there's always going to be a bucket of people who are in their own information silo, who will not be convinced by anything, who could see the videos of a refugee being arrested and would still say, well, this is just collateral for a good enforcement campaign. But I think there is a significant bucket of people who have had their minds changed. I think there are people who I've heard a lot from readers of Christianity Today who were really discouraged about the church broadly and were so encouraged by what they saw Minnesota Christians doing, both mainline and evangelical, I would say, in terms of helping their neighbors. And I think it's clear from the example of Minnesota churches that this is not an easy thing to do. This is inconvenient. You don't know how long it's going to continue, that you have to keep bringing food to people, driving people to work, doing all the things that Minnesota churches have been doing, showing up to protests. I mean, it just, a couple weeks ago, no one knew how long this was going to continue at the level that it was continuing. So I think seeing in the sacrifice that was required, I mean, even people's lives, that Americans were able to show up and be the adults in the room. I think that has been super encouraging to Christians around the country. So I don't know how much evangelicals would show up for protests. And maybe you saw evangelicals at protests. I know individually of some that went in Minnesota, but I don't know institutionally if that's a thing that evangelicals do as much, but they will show up and they will do the mutual aid, like you said. So I think I've heard from a lot of churches who said, hey, now we know how to do this by the example of Minnesota. So I think there's more gumption now to do this kind of thing and to see that it's possible even in a really difficult circumstance. So I don't know, despite all the horribleness of the situation there, it seems like it's been really a boost to a lot of Christians that this is what the church can be. So, but I don't want to be too rose-colored about it. I'm curious for how it feels for you. Does it feel like it's been encouraging, or does it feel more complicated?
It's a little bit of both. I think it's been encouraging to see people, I think, from all walks of life and from all backgrounds step up. I think one thing I would have loved to see, especially in the protesting and all that stuff, was a little bit more reaching out across partisan or ideological lines sometimes. And sometimes that didn't happen as much, but that's kind of where we're at right now as a nation. But I think what has been helpful and hopeful is to see people, again, from different backgrounds, whether they be mainline Protestant or evangelical or Catholic, kind of all say, this is not right, this is wrong, and we're going to do something about it. And whether that was in protesting, whether that was in mutual aid, I mean, there were just a lot of people that were willing to not just kind of go with the official line, that there were, kind of, as you said earlier, a lot of Shipra and Puas out there that were willing to disobey or not listen to what the federal government was telling them. And I think to really, put themselves in the line and decide that it was more important to follow Christ than it was to follow the government in this case.
Yeah, and I will say in the short time I was there that I met several people who were either lapsed Christians or had never gone to church who said to me, I'm interested in visiting a church because of this is what the church is like. It has my curiosity. And I don't, I think that's unusual. I don't think even, we track these trends at Christianity Today of interest in church and all that. And there's a growing interest in spirituality. There's not a growing interest in going to church. So, so I think that's, if the church can be known for helping people, maybe that's a good way forward. But we'll see if it spreads other places.
I'm kind of curious, what do you think is going to, or have you heard anything about what is going to be the future moving forward with DHS and all of this? Do you know, this is the plan that they're going to be looking and scrutinizing everyone's status once they, refugees and all that? Is this going to be how refugees are going to have to live, with kind of looking over their shoulder?
That's the fear. There's, I think, 100,000 refugees at risk nationwide. Who the specific reexamination is for any refugee that hasn't received their green card yet. So refugees apply for green cards 1 year after their arrival. But the Trump administration stopped processing those green cards. And so it's sort of this situation where they applied, but there's no way for them to actually get the green card. So they're getting reexamined. It's this sort of circular reasoning, but
Kafka-esque.
Yes. Yeah. So, that's a lot of people who are at risk. And I think that DHS has made clear that they intend to go as far as courts will allow them to go. They haven't been very communicative about how they're going to go about this. I mean, it seems like they're throwing spaghetti against the wall in terms of, we'll arrest some of these people, we'll interview these people nicely in an office, we'll shackle people who are interviewed in other situations. So those are specific cases I heard about. And to me, it blows my mind to think of a legal refugee being shackled like they committed some crime. But yeah, I think the agencies like Arrive and Advocates for Human Rights in Minnesota, they have been a huge help to this situation. I heard multiple people bring them up because they're handling a lot of the legal representation. I mean, again, like I said, these World Relief and these other groups don't have lawyers ready to go to help these refugees out when they get, because the speed is so important. I think we have all become kind of familiar with this because it's happened so many times, but you have to file a habeas petition right away if someone's arrested so they aren't transferred out of state. And that requires you having lawyers ready to do that. And it's hard to find immigration lawyers in Minnesota, especially. So I know Advocates for Human Rights has been a huge asset in making that happen and keeping people from being sent to Texas or in helping win some of these legal cases. So yeah, it's all hands on deck. And I think those alliances are really interesting. I mean, I wonder if Arrive and Advocates for Human Rights had ever worked together before.
I'm guessing they haven't.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is probably a first, but it would make sense because Advocates for Human Rights has a long track record, that it would make sense that that's who they would go to, or at least that the two would start working together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and when I was at Dios Habla Hoy, which is an evangelical Latino church, they were telling me, so they're running this huge food program. They were telling me that most of their volunteers are from the LGBTQ community. So I also think there's interesting maybe alliances that didn't exist before, or at least people bumping into each other who didn't bump into each other before. And that's always a good thing.
I think it is. There is another church, I think it's an evangelical Latino church in Burnsville, so in the southern suburbs, that has been kind of a focal point. And so a lot of churches, and again, across the church lines, have been helping out. And I think that in some way has brought people together in a way that sadly I had to take this to happen, but has really done that.
I mean, that's the way you win, right? Is community.
Exactly.
I really believe that so much that anytime we're spending on our phones and not with other people is a loss. And I think that Minnesota showed a different way for people that now you can, show up and be just, escorting someone to work. That is so huge. And it's a small thing, but it makes someone less afraid. It makes, it means that you're not driving to work by yourself. So, yeah, there's just so many things that I think in our isolated society could be good lessons from this. So, but I'm not trying to romanticize it, No,
but it's one of those things that there is good that comes out of a stressful situation. And I think that's a good thing. If something like that can happen in the midst of all of this chaos, that's a good thing.
Yeah. How are things now? And just from your ground perspective, I'm curious.
It's interesting. I think the word that I always want to use is that I think it's less intense. Whereas I think maybe a month ago, obviously it was very intense. There were things happening all over the place. It's not it doesn't feel as heavy, I think, as it once did. That doesn't mean, obviously I think there are people that are still in need, people still somewhat afraid of going out to do things. I know that some of the church groups that I work with, they're still collecting food for people. And I think businesses are still trying to kind of figure themselves out after all of this. So it's not what it was a month ago, but I think we're still it's kind of just slowly decreasing from what it once was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so one thing that really struck me when I was there a few weeks ago was the devastation to Latino communities. And from my focus point, Latino churches, and seeing a church with 500 members is now meeting with 80 and they're locking their doors and all of that. Have you noticed that just, I don't know, in restaurants or places like that, if there's still a decline in that population?
There is. I haven't checked recently in some places, so I haven't noticed if it has, but one example that I've used in the past was, I don't know, there's a chain, a fried chicken chain called Pollo Campero, which is in a lot of different communities, and they have two locations here in the Twin Cities, one in just outside of St. Paul, and then another one just outside of Minneapolis. And those places in the past have always just been busy and filled with Latino families. And when I've gone there recently, the door to the dining room has been locked. And so it's just takeouts only. I haven't really checked recently if things have, I know some businesses have started to open up again. And, but I think it's kind of a slow thing. I know that there are places, like there are fundraisers happening, especially for some businesses, just because those businesses were devastated during this time because either they were closed or they had to kind of slow down in their business. We had a few places where the owners were actually arrested, and detained. So it's kind of been a mess, but I think in some places it's slowly healing, but there's still just a lot of economic damage because, of course, their businesses, what they were doing was, how much ever money and everything was just went down because they couldn't be open all the time, or they just weren't open at all.
Yeah.
So,
Have you kind of figured out how to channel your ministry energy? Because it seems like there's so many different ways you could go as a minister. I mean,
mhm.
yeah, how have you wrestled with that?
Part of it has been for me is finding ways that I can get involved. And, I've helped try to get my church involved in donating groceries to help people. And so I've gone out with people in my congregation to deliver groceries. And that's been helpful. And I think helping to find ways of helping people understand, this is how we need to try to help people and to be present with people right now. And just to try to keep that going, because I think it's going to be a while before people will feel comfortable enough to resume their normal lives, because that just was so disruptive to people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I've tried to just explain to people outside of Minnesota, just in normal conversations, how bad it was. And it's so hard to convey. I mean, I just think
Mm,
about talking to people who are delivering food that they're checking over their shoulder to see if someone's following them to the place where they're delivering the food. And that is crazy to think about in the United States, that you can't give food to somebody without putting them at risk.
hmm
So,
Yeah, you had to make sure if I was driving, to drive a different route. If I drove one route to drop food off, and drive a different way to get back because someone could be following you. And yeah, you just kind of had that sense that you could be followed. And, so I'm just kind of always looking around, making sure I wasn't being followed.
mhm.
I probably was, but so
Well, it's so great that you have such a good local media set up there. I mean, I'm helicoptering in as a national reporter, and I'm sure that's a little bit annoying that you all had so many national reporters who were telling you what your town was like and what places were like. But I'm so impressed with Star Tribune and all the other. I mean, there's so many outlets there that are doing great reporting that I think have made a huge difference on top of what all the churches and everyone else is doing. That I mean, you think about a place like Pittsburgh doesn't have a newspaper anymore, so it's
yeah,
a gift.
it is. And that's, I actually was trained and got my bachelor's in journalism. So I've always been a kind of a person following the media, and, hearing about places like Pittsburgh losing a paper because you won't, and it's because of this reason. I mean, you won't hear these stories, and those stories are important, because if you don't know, then a lot of these things can happen, and then they will happen under the cover of darkness, and that's not good. And I think the fact that still have a very strong media that was able to just report on what's going on and do detailed reporting to show I think helps make a difference. And I think also help get the word out beyond Minnesota to know what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can tell you have a journalism background. There's a curiosity there, but I also, yeah, I think about just the first refugee that gets arrested. Who do you call to tell that story? You're gonna call somebody who's there and can immediately give the right context and get the community that is there to know and care about what's happening. And that's something that I can never do. But it's amazing that those institutions are there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's cool. I'm blessed that we have that here in Minnesota.
Yeah. And you're doing the religion journalism that is local, and that's great too.
Well, and I think that that's important because I think this is a story that a lot of people still don't know about. And I think the church, this is something that the church does really, we don't even really think about it. We just know, well, here are these refugees. Oh yeah, of course we'll help them. So this is just something that we do. And I think what's happening now that they're going after refugees really hits up what the church has always done, which is to welcome people, especially who are fleeing from persecution and from, oppressive governments. That seems to be a no-brainer. And so when people start to basically go after them, it's like, yeah, no, we have to say something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of complicated issues out there, but this is not one of them. So
Nope.
That's does make it easy in some ways. But I agree. I think that a lot of churches are meeting the moment in a way that they should, and that's good for my cynical reporter brain. So, yeah.
Well, and I think that this issue especially is important to help people know that, because I think especially in the Trump years, people have just thought that evangelicals are a monolith. And I've always been taught not to believe that any group is a monolith, that there are differences. Everyone is different. And especially on this issue, I think it's not a monolith. And I think people need to know that and know that this is a place where I think people have been willing to challenge the administration and say, no, we want to help our neighbors and to do that.
Yeah. I will say, I mean, just from our internal traffic numbers, that this was one of our most read stories in the last 30 days. And so I think people care about this. Christians care about this. And I don't think that Minnesota is on everyone's radar, and I don't think that it's going away anytime soon. So there are evangelicals who do really care about immigrants and want to be there and help them and do the right thing. So hopefully that contingent grows.
Well, if people want to kind of read some of the other work you've done, and I know you've done some other articles, especially on Minnesota, where should they go?
Yeah, ChristianityToday.com. You can look in the news section and find a lot of my coverage. We're a small staff, but trying to cover things like we're a big company. But yeah, I think there will be continued in-depth coverage of these things, and we try to do more magazine-style reporting and do the story that's relevant 2 weeks after a shooting like Alex Preddy and not just the day after. So we'll continue to be following what's happening in Minnesota and reach out with story ideas. So.
Well, Emily, thank you so much. And thank you for your reporting of what's been going on in Minnesota. And I hope to have you back on sometime soon.
Yeah, it was a real joy to talk to you. So thanks for being such a good interviewer. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you. There is one note to our my conversation with Emily. On the day that we recorded, which was February 27th, there was a ruling issued by Federal District Judge John R. Thunheim here in Minnesota, and that forbid the federal government from arresting and detaining refugees in Minnesota who have no grounds for removal and are awaiting green cards. This injunction, I should know, only applies to Minnesota. So in other parts of the country, refugees can still face arrest. The government hasn't yet, according to this note, and this is actually something that Emily has written from Christianity Today, they haven't yet said that they're going to appeal, but it has argued in the February 18th memo that it can and could indefinitely detain refugees in the U.S. that haven't received green cards yet. They've included kind of excerpts from Thunheim's ruling, and I wanted to actually share just a few paragraphs that I think are important to hear. And as I said, I will put this in the show notes. I hope that you will read these excerpts. They're pretty important. This is part of what Thunheim said. In the Refugee Act, this nation extended a helping hand to those escaping persecution. We made a simple promise: pass the vetting, follow the law, and you will be given a chance at a new beginning in safety. That promise was not symbolic. It was concrete. It meant the opportunity to work, to worship, to raise children without fear, and to build a future under the protection of American law. Stability, not more fear, was the commitment. The government's proposed new interpretation upends that commitment without clear authorization from Congress and rests on constitutionally precarious grounds. Defendants seek to transform a system built on promised opportunities and freedom into one of uncertainty and indefinite confinement. Until the legality of this dramatic shift is addressed at trial, the court will not allow those who relied on this nation's promise of safety to be met instead with handcuffs. The Constitution requires steadiness, fidelity to statute, and respect for promises made. The rule of law demands no less. Again, that is part of the ruling from Judge John R. Thunheim, and that is basically, for now at least, forbidding the federal government from arresting and detaining Minnesota refugees who have no grounds for removal and are awaiting their green cards. I will put this in the show notes. I do urge you to read it. It's an important document. And as I said, unfortunately, it is not applying to the rest of the country at this time. But I wanted to add that note to our conversation. I'd also want to know what you are thinking about this issue when it comes to refugees. As usual, you can leave a note by dropping a line at churchandmain@substack.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, if you want to learn more about the podcast, listen to past episodes, donate, check us out at churchandmain.org. You can go to churchandmain.substack.com to read related articles. I hope that you will consider subscribing to the podcast in your favorite podcast app, and also leave a rating or review that allows others to find this podcast. If you want to make a donation, there are links available in the show notes. And also there's a link available if you would like to get the episode to show up in your email inbox once it goes live. That is it for this episode of Church and Main. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, everyone. Godspeed, and I will see you very soon.